Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a journey through the intricate labyrinths of power and wealth. There is a truth that the richest individuals on this planet always keep close, which is that if you want to hold your own destiny, you must understand the rules of the game played by those steering the world. If you have the patience to follow this deep analysis to the very end, I guarantee that your economic vision will be elevated to a new height. This insight will help you see the hidden flows of money behind geopolitical conflicts, allowing you to find the path to financial freedom and sustainable prosperity in a volatile world. Think of this as a secret map, where we peel back the masks of superpowers to reveal the core of the survival game known as dollars, oil, and absolute power. On the grand chessboard of global politics, there are pieces that are never allowed to fall. Not because they are too strong, but because their collapse would trigger a disaster for those standing behind them. We often hear the West speak of Iran as an isolated nation, a weak link that can be snapped through strict sanctions and continuous military pressure. However, if you believe that Iran is merely a solitary issue, and that if the current regime collapses, a pro-Western democracy will sprout like mushrooms to serve American interests, then you are falling into a sweet but dangerous illusion. There is an invisible alliance, a geopolitical iron triangle between Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran, acting as a solid barrier, ensuring that Iran will never collapse the way Washington hopes. The existence of an independent Iran that opposes the West is not a matter of sentiment or ideological harmony, but a cold calculation of strategic interest. A pro-Western Iran would be a catastrophic disaster for both Russia and China, as it would sweep away their influence in the Middle East and directly threaten their national energy security. It would be like placing a razor-sharp NATO blade right against Russia's southern flank and cutting off China's maritime Silk Road. Therefore, Moscow and Beijing will do whatever is necessary, including the most extreme measures, to prevent this scenario from happening. This is not a story about rescuing a regime, but a war to protect a multipolar world order where the United States is no longer the only one giving orders. Iran is the keystone in the strategic architecture of Russia and China within Central Asia and the Middle East. If this stone falls, their entire effort to build influence over many decades will crumble into dust in an instant. Washington refuses to accept this harsh reality, continuing to play with old-fashioned sanction cards without understanding that Iran never has to fight alone. Let us begin with Russia, a relationship that is highly complex and perhaps the most misunderstood in contemporary history. Russia and Iran are not natural allies. On the contrary, they were historical rivals with bloody wars fought over control of the Caucasus and Central Asia in the past. The Russian and Persian empires clashed directly over centuries. And even during World War II, the Soviet Union occupied northern Iran. Distrust still flickers beneath the ashes of history. But modern geopolitics does not operate on emotion or absolute trust. It operates on core interests. For Russia, the greatest and only interest is energy, because Russia is a nation that lives on oil and gas. More than 50% of Russia's federal budget revenue comes from exporting resources, and a vast portion of that flows toward Europe. For decades, Russia has used gas as a tightening ring to maintain its influence over the old continent. The flow of gas through pipelines like Nord Stream or through Ukraine and Belarus has given Russia an unparalleled lever of power at the negotiating table. When Europe threatens to punish Russia over the Ukraine issue, Moscow only needs to gently remind them about cutting off the heating supply in the middle of a freezing winter. This lever is more precious than any nuclear weapon, as it can divide the European Union, forcing nations like Hungary, Slovakia, or Germany to think twice before opposing Russia. But this strategic card only works if Europe has no other alternative. This is the crucial point. Iran is the most potential alternative, and therefore, the most dangerous to Russia. Iran possesses the second largest natural gas reserves in the world, exceeding 1,200 trillion cubic feet, a figure that rivals the Russian giant. Geographically, Iran is perfectly positioned to supply energy to Europe via pipelines through Turkey. If Iran were to change its stance and become a pro-Western nation, if sanctions were lifted and giant energy corporations from the United States and Europe poured money into Tehran's gas fields, then within 5 to 10 years, Iranian gas would completely replace Russian gas. At that point, Russia's revenue would collapse, Putin's power lever would vanish, and Russia would become a declining power with a small economy and an exhausted army. That is why Russia will never let Iran fall into Western hands. This is a war of survival for Moscow. Russia has spent the last decade tightening its ties with Tehran by providing the most advanced weaponry, from the S-300 air defense system to the Su-35 fighter jets. They share intelligence, send military advisors, and coordinate closely on the Syrian battlefield to protect the Assad regime. At the United Nations Security Council, Russia acts as a steadfast diplomatic shield for Iran, always ready to use its veto power to block any new sanctions from the United States. Most importantly, in the current period, Russia has become a major customer of Iran, purchasing thousands of Shahed, 136 suicide drones. These cheap but effective aircraft are causing terror in Ukrainian cities, attacking power plants and civilian infrastructure at a much lower cost than Russian cruise missiles. Iran is providing Russia with an essential military tool in a time of crisis. And in return, Russia grants Iran technological protection and political standing. However, Russia's support also has implicit limits. Moscow does not want Iran to become so powerful that it could dominate the entire Middle East and challenge Russia's own interests. This is an extremely sophisticated balancing game. Russia wants Iran strong enough to resist pressure from the United States, but not strong enough to escape Moscow's control. Now, let us look at China, where strategic calculations are even more long-term and profound than Russia's. China is currently the world's largest importer of oil, with volumes exceeding 10 million barrels per day. Much of this vital energy comes from the Middle East, passing through sea lanes fraught with risk. Beijing's economy, industry, and military strength all depend on a stable energy flow. However, this flow must pass through extremely vulnerable choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz or the Strait of Malacca. These are bottlenecks that the United States Navy could easily blockade and cut off in the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. This is China's ultimate nightmare scenario, often referred to as the Malacca Dilemma, and Iran is the key to solving this puzzle. Iran offers China a perfect alternative solution through land routes and transcontinental pipeline systems. The Belt and Road Initiative, the grand strategy to connect Asia and Europe, goes straight through the heart of Iran. China has invested billions of dollars in Iranian seaports, highways, and railways. The 25-year Strategic Cooperation Agreement worth $400 billion, signed in the year 2021, ensures China's right to access cheap oil from Iran in exchange for infrastructure, investment. But the story does not stop at oil barrels. For China, Iran is also a land bridge connecting the Persian Gulf to the Caspian Sea and Central Asia. If China can control the logistics network through Iran, they can completely bypass the maritime bottlenecks guarded by the United States. Goods can flow from factories in Shenzhen through Central Asia, across Iran and Turkey, to enter the heart of Europe. Iran is an indispensable link. Without Tehran, the entire Belt and Road Initiative would be severed, and China would forever remain under the threat of naval blockades. Beijing will never let Tehran fall to the West, because a pro-US Iran means the United States holds China's entire commercial lifeline. However, China is a master of pragmatism on the political stage. They do not want to be dragged into a direct war over Iran. Beijing avoids military confrontation with the United States, so its support for Tehran is usually calibrated at an economic and technological level rather than pure military force. China buys Iranian oil despite United States sanctions, and they pay in yuan instead of US dollars, an act that directly challenges the dominance of the greenback. They provide telecommunications equipment, advanced surveillance, and facial recognition systems to help the Iranian government maintain social control. They invest in infrastructure, but do not provide weapons of mass destruction or send direct troops. China's goal is not to rescue an ally out of loyalty, but to prevent Iran from becoming a Western client state. As long as Iran remains independent and hostile toward the United States, China's interests are served. Furthermore, there is another important dimension: the desire to build a multipolar world order. Both Russia and China have staked their entire foreign policies on challenging the unipolar dominance of the United States. Iran is a laboratory for them to prove that the world does not have only one pole, that regional powers have the right to self-determination, and that the West cannot impose its will on every nation. Iran has resiliently resisted United States pressure for the past 45 years, overcoming every embargo, isolation, and military threat. Tehran has built a powerful network of proxy forces from Hezbollah to the Houthis, creating significant challenges for United States allies in the region. Iran is a symbol of resistance against Western hegemony, and if Iran falls, if the United States succeeds in regime change in Tehran, it would be a terrifying message to any other nations seeking to challenge the US. It would tell the world that all resistance is futile, that the United States will always win in the end, and that you cannot survive outside the Western-led system. Russia and China cannot allow that message to be sent, as they understand they would be the next targets if Iran falls. The focus will immediately shift to Moscow and Beijing. Pressure will mount, sanctions will tighten, and containment strategies will expand. Therefore, protecting Iran is essentially protecting their own future. Iran's existence is the most vivid proof that the multipolar order is real, that nations can resist, and that there are always alternatives to Western financial and political systems. The survival of Iran is the key factor for Russia and China to maintain their own legitimacy against pressure from Washington. In reality, the support of Russia and China for Iran is like economic oxygen tubes that keep Tehran from ever stopping breathing. China provides consumer goods, technology, and a market for oil, helping the Iranian economy avoid a total collapse even if it cannot make the nation prosperous. Russia coordinates on energy policy to keep oil prices stable and provides Iran with a diplomatic seat at the United Nations. Militarily, Iran and Russia have silent exchanges in the shadows. There are reports of Russian experts assisting Iran with its missile and nuclear programs. Not publicly, but enough to make opponents wary. Russia understands that an Iran with nuclear weapons, or at least standing at the threshold of nuclear technology, would be an Iran that the West would never dare to touch because the price to pay would be too high. Therefore, promoting Iran's nuclear program to a moderate degree, not yet reaching the point of creating actual weapons to avoid triggering an attack from Israel, but enough to create deterrence, is the most beneficial scenario for Russia. In terms of intelligence and technology, China exports to Iran the world's most effective internet control and dissident tracking systems, which they have perfected in Xinjiang. This is how they help the Tehran regime survive internal storms of protest. The most important question is whether Russia and China would intervene militarily to save Iran if the regime were on the brink of collapse. The answer is almost certainly no. They would not send troops to protect the current administration, but they would intervene to prevent a pro-Western government from taking power. If Iran fell into chaos or civil war, Moscow and Beijing would support ultra-nationalist or anti-Western military factions. They would provide weapons, money, and advisors to turn Iran into a Syria 2.0. A prolonged proxy war that prevents any one faction from uniting the country and leaning toward the United States. This is a nightmare scenario for Washington, because even if they overthrow the current regime, what they receive will not be a democracy, but a wasteland of instability and violence. Where the United States cannot invest or control, eventually, a strong man will emerge from the ashes. Perhaps a general from the Revolutionary Guard or a nationalist politician. And Russia and China will immediately back that person. Their ultimate goal is to ensure Iran remains an independent nation, preventing the presence of United States military bases, preventing the normalization of relations with Israel, and blocking energy pipelines leading to Europe. They do not fight for Tehran. They fight to prevent Washington's victory for the West. This means that regime change in Iran is merely a pipe dream unless they are prepared for a costly, bloody military intervention lasting decades. But the West is currently not prepared for that. The United States just left Afghanistan in a state of exhaustion, and the Iraq War was a costly lesson in error. There is no political will in Washington or European capitals large enough to start a new war in the Middle East. The public will not support it. Budgets are tightening, and militaries are stretched thin across too many fronts. Therefore, sanctions and pressure will continue as an endless loop without bringing real results. The hope of an internal uprising by the Iranian people to establish a pro-Western government will remain a fragile hope, while Russia and China provide the Tehran administration with every tool to suppress and survive. This is a brutal geopolitical reality that the world must face. Iran will not collapse the way the West desires, because Moscow and Beijing will never allow it to happen. Their interests are too large, and the price of Tehran's collapse is too high. Until the West accepts this reality and stops dreaming of an easy regime change, this stalemate will continue, and the suffering of the Iranian people will endure. Iran will not fall, because Moscow and Beijing have decided so. And in the world of real power, the decisions of these giants are what truly carry weight. I hope you have gained a deeper perspective after this analysis. Goodbye, and see you again.